Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is artist June Brigman. June, welcome to Comic Culture.
Thanks for having me.
June, you are currently working on the Mary Worth newspaper strip, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you got started on that strip and maybe some of the differences between working on a newspaper strip daily versus a sequential book like Power Pack.
My husband and I took over Mary Worth, I guess it's been about 3 years ago now. My husband is Roy Richardson, and we work together on the strip. I do the penciling, which is the initial artwork, and then he does the finishing part. He does inking and lettering and coloring on the strip. And we took over the artistic reins from the artist Joe Giella, who is just a legend in the industry, incredible artist. So kind of a tough act to follow. And he finally, at the age of 87, decided maybe it was time for him to retire. But we had previously done another comic strip called Brenda Starr Reporter that we did for 15 years. We took that over from Ramona Fraden. We quit, and it was canceled in 11, yeah. So there were a few years there where we did not have a comic strip. And when Joe said he was ready to retire, my name came up, based on my previous experience with Brenda Starr, and did some samples, and the writer and the editor liked our work, and so that's how we came to work on Mary Worth. But we also are still very active in comic books. We're currently doing a book called Captain Ginger. It's for Ahoy Comics. It's written by Stuart Moore. Stuart and I are co-creators on that book. So I get to play in two similar but different sandboxes. Comic strips are very different from comic books. The formatting is very set. You have a very strict format you have to work in because of the way it's printed in newspapers. And it tends to be very repetitive. The story is advanced in the Sunday strip, and then the dailies basically kind of expand and repeat what was done on the Sunday. Comic books, tend to have a lot more freedom. The format is up to you. I mean, you have a set page size, but as far as the shape and number and arrangement of panels and the artwork, that's pretty much up to the artist. The story generally advances more quickly. The typical comic book is 22 pages. So, you'll kind of have a beginning and end to a story within that frame. So it's they both have their challenges, but one is just the strips are a little more restrictive.
Now, when you get a strip like Brenda Starr or Mary Worth, obviously they want you to make the characters look familiar to current readers of the strip, but at the same time, you're a different artist brought in because of your unique talents. So how do you sort of balance the classic look of the characters with what you bring to the strip on a daily basis?
That's interesting because on some strips like, say, Blondie, they're going to be more strict about maintaining a look and a style. Strips like Mary Worth and Brenda Starr, you have a little bit more freedom of interpretation. So, when I first started Mary Worth, I looked at what Joe did, the previous artist, Joe Giella, but I can no more imitate his style than I could, forge his signature. It's very individualistic. So I had to kind of find a balance between creating characters that were still recognizable, that had been established in the strip, and still doing it in my own style. And it took a little while to settle into it. There were a lot of complaints. Mary's too fat, she's too thin, she's too young, she's too old. And finally, I settled on something that I was happy with. And the readers eventually accepted it. The main complaint I got was that she looked too young. But to me, I guess I think of Mary as being probably about 70. And I'm not that far away. Plus, I have friends who are in their 70s. and they look really great. I like to think that 70 is the new 50. So, for a while, the readers are calling her facelift Mary. So it is kind of like she went to a really good health spa, maybe had a facelift or something like that. She's still recognizable, but she's a more modern version of what a 70-year-old woman looks like.
And that's something that I do notice in the art is that it is very of the time. And looking at Mary now, you could imagine her as somebody in the supermarket, whereas the previous version of Mary, you would think that she should be, not to sound cruel, but perhaps in a nursing home. And I think it is sort of a generational shift as we start to live longer and healthier lives. And it's interesting that that's your approach. So when you take over Brenda Starr, is that something, she has an iconic look, is that something where you're just kind of, modeling the original strip and then it's slowly changing to your own style, or were you able to kind of get in there and get your hands dirty right away?
I think with Brenda, I tried harder to imitate the style of Ramona Fradon, the previous artist, who's really amazing. But it was slowing me down. I was having trouble keeping up with the pace of production because I was trying to imitate a style that wasn't my own. So if you look at the strip, we did that strip for about 15 years. And if you look at the ones we did at the beginning compared to the ones we did at the end, you can see a real shift in style. But I found that there were some things I could not change. She always had to have the sparkles in her hair and the twinkle in her eye. And if I ever left those out, I'd get hate mail. So, so I tried to at least maintain that.
And when you take over a legacy strip, are you doing a lot of research to maybe get to know the physicality of the characters? I know it's one thing to look at the art, but it's another thing to make the art reflect the personalities of the characters, especially in long-established series. So is that something that you're considering as you get into the character work?
Oh, sure. But that's, the characters in Mary Worth are certainly very well established. And, I have reprints of, I probably about 10 years of strips that came before I took it over. And, I read those strips and kind of got to know the characters. But it's a kind of an organic relationship between the artist, the writer, and the established characters. Some of the characters, since I've been working with the writer, Karen Moy, and, we have this exchange of ideas, they've sort of changed too. And I think my depictions of them have changed with the characters. There's a character named Iris who has, it's funny how a lot of the characters seem to get younger. Maybe that's my wish fulfillment or something. But Iris has, her character has changed a lot since I've been working with Karen. And, we've had some different ideas about the direction she should go in. And that's sort of been reflected in how I draw her. It's not so much a conscious thing. It's just that the characters in the story, as Karen writes them, that's going to be reflected in my drawing. I'm not really conscious of it. It just kind of happens.
Let's talk a little bit about that collaboration between you and Karen, because I know in comics you might, if you're working the Marvel style, you might get a rough idea of what the story is, and you're sort of given free rein to create it. But is this something where Karen's giving you a script and maybe the two of you discuss what the end goal is, or is it something where it's maybe a 50-50 true collaboration where she's got an idea and you can kind of chime in on it, or is it something where she's giving you the script and just go at it as it is?
We collaborate usually at the beginning of a new story arc. She'll say, what about this? And I'll say, oh, cool, but maybe what about this? And she'll say, oh, yeah, we can do that, but what about this? And we just kind of throw some ideas in the stew pot and stir it around and see what happens. Sometimes partway through a story arc, we'll see a character taking it in a different direction, and we'll discuss that, and she'll run it by her editors. And I know one of the story arcs we did recently where a young character, Dawn, has like a summer romance with an exchange student. Partway through it, we were already thinking about how it was going to end, and we started thinking about the characters and like completely changed the ending just based on the direction the characters had kind of taken us in the story. So that does happen sometimes. There is some nice interplay and exchange of ideas.
And is it something, because I read that arc and I did enjoy it, so I'm wondering, when you're working on that, how far out are you working, and are you thinking of the next arc at the beginning when you start the new arc? At what point are you starting to think about where the next story is going to take us?
We don't really start to think about the next story arc till we get to the end of the current one. Like the one I'm working on now is getting to the point where we'll be wrapping it up. So we need to, So I already has an idea for a next one. I want to run it by Karen and see what she says. And, there's a character we established that I'd like to revisit. I don't know how much I should say. It was an old man whose dog died, and he gets a new dog. And it was a new Charterstone character. And I'd really kind of like to go back and revisit that. And plus, it's fun to, draw cats and dogs. And old guys are fun, too. So we'll see. We'll see. That may be the next story arc, but yeah, generally we're not planning that far ahead.
And it's interesting. You talk about characters that you enjoy drawing. And one of the characters that comes up is Wilbur. He seems to be in a number of recent strips. As we tape in November of 2019, he's involved in he gets drunk at a restaurant and embarrasses himself. But he also had an arc recently where he was overcoming depression through karaoke. So is this a character that you have a fondness for, and you say, you know what, let's go back and explore and see what we can discover?
Well, he is kind of fun because he has so many issues, and that makes him a lot more interesting and fun to draw. And he's a funny character because he really tries very hard, but he does make mistakes. He has real relationship issues. So it just makes for, some fun storylines. We can take him and kind of, he starts out with all these good intentions, and it's fun to think of how it's going to go wrong. And then it's also fun to think of how it's going to work out, or maybe not. I mean, that's another character that I think has kind of changed over time, and he's just kind of fun to play with.
You're working on 7 days a week of new strips, 6 of which are, 3 panels each, and the Sunday could be, 6 or 9. I'm not 100% sure. So when you're sitting down and starting to work, what's your average day like? I know you're working from home. Sometimes there can be distractions like cats or something like that, knocking something over. So how do you kind of work from home, and what's your pace?
I worked at home most of my adult life. I taught part-time at a couple of different schools. But, on the one hand, I don't have to put on a suit or pantyhose. I don't have to commute. But it does take a kind of discipline. I find I work best if I get up in the morning, I putter around, do a little bit of housework maybe, wait for my blurry eyes to start to focus. And I like to get to work in the morning. I'm not a night owl. I'll take some breaks during the day. And then after dinner, I'll go back and maybe finish up a couple of hours work. But like by 9 o'clock, I just want to watch something on TV, maybe read, look at Facebook, something like that. So, but we don't really, people are often surprised that we work on the weekends. So, and I think it's typical of most freelancers that you don't really think about weekends. You don't think about holidays. You just think about the deadline. So, it's not for everyone. You have to create your own structure.
Now, you mentioned being a freelancer, and your career goes back to the 1980s when you were working in comics exclusively. And one of the books that you are best known for is Power Pack. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about those characters and how you got involved with that series.
Power Pack was just serendipity. I was just trying to break into comics. My husband Roy and I made a trip to New York and visited the Marvel office. And back then you could do that if you knew somebody that worked there. We had a friend who was working as kind of an assistant editor, and he got us in the door, and we just walked around and knocked on the editor's door, and we're showing our portfolio. And Louise Simonson was an editor at the time, and I showed her my portfolio, and she said, you know, I've got this idea for a group of child superheroes. Can you draw children? And I said, yeah, I can. And it may seem like a funny thing to ask, but at the time, I mean, everything was superheroes. And the superheroes were all big, muscly guys. I mean, you know, even Daredevil, Spider-Man, they weren't as bulky as, say, Thor, but you had to be able to draw musculature and guys and buxom women. And a lot of artists had a problem drawing children. It's a very different set of challenges when you're drawing children. And I'd had some experience. I worked at Six Flags Over Georgia as a portrait artist, not caricature. These were straight portraits, and just drawing my own relatives. So I had a clue about how to draw children. I went that night back to the friend's place where we were staying and worked up some samples and brought them in the next day. And Wheezy liked them. And we worked up a presentation to Jim Shooter, who basically shook our hand and said, okay, go make a comic book. So that's how that happened.
Power Pack was used as part of a giveaway to talk about something that's not that easy to talk about, which is child sex abuse. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how that came about and how you were able to handle that touchy subject.
This was at a time when child sex abuse was really in the news. Not that it hadn't been around for who knows how long, but people were finally really becoming aware of it and trying to be proactive about the prevention. And you know, it is a very sensitive subject, but, you know, Louise did such a great job with the writing. It is geared towards young readers, and we wanted to be clear in our message without being, I don't know, offensive, I guess. And I think that, you know, with the sensitivity of Wheezy's writing, we really accomplished that.
And it is something that people are still talking about today, how it had such a big impact. And it, I guess, speaks to the legacy of the characters, and it also speaks to the way that you and Louise were able to work these characters. It seems no one's quite gotten it right since the two of you left that series.
There have been some really good artists. I mean, John Bogdanoff, when he took over the book, he did a great job. He really got children. And I guess it was just, you know, a nice combination of Wheezy understanding children and their personalities, and I had some clue about how to draw them and their body language and facial expressions. And I think we were just trying to be real, even though these were kids in this, you know, crazy superhero universe. We were both very aware of what children are really like. And I think it was that honesty that's, you know, kept them around and given the characters staying power.
When you're working on a comic, you have a lot more pages and a lot more panels that you can delve into storytelling and perhaps camera angles and that sort of philosophy. So I'm wondering, when you're working on a daily strip of Mary Worth, are you changing the way that you're going to visualize the story because maybe the newspaper is not going to be as, the strip's not going to be printed as large in the newspaper? Or are you saying, you know what, I'm going to tell the story the best way it can be told, regardless of whatever limitations there might be?
Well, I think any artist, you know, you have to work within the restrictions of your medium. And that can be a good thing. That can force you to come up with some creative solutions. I do know with the comic strip, because of, like I said, the limited format, and also the size it's printed in the newspapers, uh, I tend to limit my shots and angles, and it's a much simpler approach than what I would use with a comic book. I very rarely do long shots in a comic strip. After a while, I forget how to draw feet because I'm doing a lot of medium shots, medium camera angles. It's much more character driven, so I'm probably focusing more on facial expressions. There's not a lot of action, so there's not a lot of call for, um, medium long shots or things that show the whole figure. So you do adjust to the limitations of the format. Um, and that's part of the storytelling. You can't say, well, I don't really care that it's going to be printed the size of a postage stamp. I'm going to do this and that. And sometimes you want to entertain yourself. But I think it's important to always be aware of how it's going to be viewed. It's nice that it is, in a internet format as well, on Comixology and in the actually it's not on Comixology. I'm sorry, on the Comics Kingdom. Sorry, getting confused about my websites. Comics Kingdom website. So you can see it in all its glory. Newspapers, they just keep getting smaller and smaller. So I can't remember when I've actually seen the strip in a newspaper. It's kind of depressing.
Well, it seems to be where things are going. And I personally, I'm a subscriber at Comics Kingdom, so I do get to read Mary every day and see it in all its glory. Now, we have about 4 or 5 minutes left before we have to wrap up our conversation. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the work you're doing at Ahoy.
I'm working on a book called Captain Ginger, and it's a book that I co-created with Stuart Moore. It's written by Stuart. It's drawn by me. I work on it with my husband, Roy, who does the inks. It's colored by Veronica Gandini. It's a great story. Yes, it is cats in space, but you don't have to be a cat person to read it. It's really good science fiction. I think it's in the tradition of Star Trek, of Battlestar Galactica. It's fun, but it's also dark. And I'm currently working on another season of Captain Ginger. The first 4 are out, and we're doing 6 more. I believe the first and this next round will come out in February. And the story definitely gets darker. It's great characters, it's great writing, and Ahoy comics are a little bit different in that you get a lot for your money. It's more of a magazine format. There's also a backup story and prose, and yeah, it's been a great company to work for.
And is this something that we'd be able to go to our local comic shop and request, or is this something that we'd be able to find online?
It is on Comixology. It is online. But hopefully your local comic book store does carry it. I know the one near me does carry Captain Ginger. And so, yeah, it's out there. There's a trade paperback with the first 4 issues. And it's a cool book. It's really, I love that I've gotten to create, another universe and another set of characters. And I love these characters. I love these stories. It's a great read. So yeah, you should definitely check it out.
And is this something where you're sort of doing this because you have the steady gig, you're able to support yourself while you work on the project, Captain Ginger, because maybe that's more of a passion project, and then are you having to go through like Kickstarter or some other crowdfunding to cover the cost of getting the book published?
No, we were close to doing a Kickstarter because we came up with this I'm trying to think of what year it was. I think 2014 is when we first put together a proposal, and Stuart started shopping it around. And we had lots of interest, but no bites. So we were going to kickstart it, but then Ahoy came along and saved us from Kickstarter. Not that there's anything wrong with Kickstarter, but Kickstarters are a lot of work. And so while it's something I'm passionate about, it's something that I'm also being compensated for. So it's worked out really well.
Well, June, I've been told that we are just about out of time. If viewers wanted to find out more about Captain Ahoy or your art, is there a website that they can go to?
There's the Ahoy website. I am on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. If you Google me, I have a web page. I don't have a website, but you will find my web page, and you can contact me through that or through Instagram or message me through Facebook. Captain Ginger is on Comixology, and you can find out more about Captain Ginger and the other books on the Ahoy website.
All right, well, June, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us today. I'd like to thank you at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon. Comic Culture is a production of the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke.